This is Flowers on the Stage.
I mean, they've really created this unbelievable model, you know, um, where it's still, even though, 13 Nights at the Garden, selling out shows all over the place, it still feels like, our unknown secret, like it's kind of still feels like our little band that I started going to see 30 years ago. You know, they're so far out of the mainstream, and it's always been about treating their fans with incredible respect, and they just do it right. I went to Fish festivals, and I was at Woodstock 99, and I mean, just polar opposites in terms of, Woodstock 99 has now been memorialized. It was really just, it felt like it was just completely gouging the people that were there. And Fish festivals, they spend so much thought and money on making the fan experience incredible. And so yeah, I respect them really well, and a lot of artists in the jam band community look at them as a model, and they've sort of modeled their business after that.
Pulling back from Fish, I'd love to hear just like cherry picking different artists, some things in particular that you just really admire about them, whether that's on the business side or musically, or just about who they are as an artist themselves, like particular things that stand out to you about certain artists.
Yeah. Well, the guy that's on my mind a lot these days is Daniel Donato. Doing a lot of business with him as a promoter. We streamed a bunch of the shows on Volume. I'm now working with a festival in Florida. They actually have two festivals. One is the Sunshine Hootenanny in November, and one is the Sunshine Get Down in May. And it's about an hour north of Tampa. And so, we're working on getting Daniel to one of those. And I just had him here. I'm in South Orange, New Jersey. Our bordering town is Maple Woodstock. Or Maplewood. We just had Maple Woodstock, which is a free festival. And I booked Daniel on the Sunday night. And, there were 3,000, 3,500 people there at this free festival. And he definitely had his fans in the pit, but there were a lot of people, you know, standing on the side, like, standing in the back, like, kind of, who the hell is this kid? But half hour in, he had everybody, really locked in. And I just think I can't say enough about him as an artist, as a person, his organization. I think he's really going to be the next guy coming out of this scene in a big way.
It feels that way. And like bringing it back to your point about connecting with fans, he's someone I feel like his personality comes through so clearly in all of his content and just like everything. Like I feel like even just casual fans of Daniel Donato feel like they probably know Daniel a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, he's this amazing spirit.
I'd love to hear what you think the future of marketing for artists looks like and how you see it evolving specifically over like the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can go, it's like 10 to 15 years ago, we didn't have TikTok, right? We didn't have, you know, a lot of the things so it's really hard to predict. But talking about, TikTok and social media, I think for a while there, people were heavily invested into building their followings, and still are. But I think on my side of things, which is, primarily in the concert industry and the artists I'm dealing with, and you got a bunch of voices out there talking about data, and we always I almost got laughed at from people as a promoter when I would say, well, our best form of marketing is email, and as you know, Cam, our emails are not just one size fits all, going out to everybody. It's very targeted. We've always been that way at CEG to have, very targeted lists to not spam people with stuff they don't want to know about. I think that email data is really key. And, you mentioned volume. One of the things about volume that a lot of people are coming around to, while they may think live streaming had its day already, during the pandemic, people are kind of coming around to this idea that we're telling them, which is, we're sharing in the data with people. We're sharing, they're getting the email addresses of the people that have watched them. They own that. That's theirs. And they're also getting a heat map where, and fans are finding out all the time about, like, we had no idea we had any fans in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but somehow a bunch of people watch there, so that's really valuable information. I think the email is really valuable. I think, obviously social media is big and there's a lot of musical discovery that's happening there. And particularly for the artists that are really good at it, and, if they have good music. But it's funny, because you mentioned CG, you mentioned volume, but I also work in other spaces. And there's someone I know that I'm dealing with that has a label and has a publishing company. And he talks about, 7 years ago when he started his label, they spent a lot of money on publicity. They spent a lot of money on radio promotion. And now they spend zero on that. And all their money basically goes to making creative videos for their artists, and they put money behind the ad spend. And that is how a lot of people are finding out about artists that way. And of course, I think Spotify is, fantastic for musical discovery, whether it's their playlist or other people's playlists, or, just the algorithm sort of feeding you stuff, based on your preferences. So I think there's great musical discovery happening there. Yeah, so I think that it's when the artist leans in to their socials and they lean into their audience, like, bringing up volume again, we do these artist subscription programs there, which are basically fan clubs, but I guess the industry doesn't like fan club. They don't like those words. So we say artist subscription program. And the artists that are leaning into those programs and really catering to their audiences. So it's kind of like Patreon, but video is the constant, but there are other perks. But, so David Cook, who was on American Idol, who has a, fairly small following, he's built an incredible business on volume because he has this one-on-one connection with his fans. And he's doing, he'll just go live and people get a push notification. All of a sudden there's David Cook in his living room talking to his fans. He'll do contests where people can get a one-on-one with him. He'll do Q&As. So he's doing a lot of things, and he's developed a whole business around that. And I am absolutely certain that, his fans feel a lot more engaged at, having that direct connection to him. And I think that's where things are heading, where artists have a deeper connection with their fans. As a Grateful Dead fan, you had to wait for Rolling Stone to put out a Jerry Garcia interview and or something like that to,
Jerry couldn't just go live on his volume. Imagine
Yeah.
Jerry just going
Oh my
live,
God.
just pulling out his acoustic, just like, hey, happy Sunday morning.
This is Flowers on the Stage, a podcast about being creative and finding success. To support it, please check out our sponsors, New Belgium Brewing and Thrax CBD. And now, back to the episode.
So jumping to the side a little bit here, like on this podcast, we talk about artists and their story and people producing art and events and the inner workings of the music business, but like also we just talk about everything. And one thing that I'm really interested is just kind of the way our minds work, the way the world works. And, growing up taking psychology classes, you learn all this about the brain, but you also learn how little we know about the brain and really how much of a mystery, like how many things that you learn in school are just scraping the surface. And, one thing you and I have spoken a lot about is somebody named Joe Dispenza, who, if anyone out there is unfamiliar, highly recommend checking him out. But yeah, jumping to the side a little bit, would love to hear just some like high level lessons, some of the biggest takeaways that you've learned from Joe Dispenza.
Well, it's hard to, isolate it to just Joe Dispenza, really like
Or
it's
perhaps
been
the
now
field that he
3.5
represents.
years for me, really started somewhere into COVID where, I had a chance to slow down and, was living with my wife and kids in the Catskills, spending every waking moment. There were no shows happening. So, I had a chance to really think about what my life was like and the things I wanted to do something about the things I was unhappy about. And so almost 3.5 years ago, I had a life coach. And then I had a business coach and I had a health coach. And along the way, I was reading a ton. I was listening to a million podcasts, a lot of personal development stuff, a lot of psychology, and just realized a lot of things about myself in that like I just couldn't, I didn't have the understanding of why I was doing what I was doing, and sort of, making a lot of mistakes, really. And I think so once I got a chance to really slow down and think about all those things, I really addressed them. I've been addressing them for 3+ years, one-on-one. And so, I've just been very, very deliberate about improvement, family, career, mindset, incredibly deliberate about it. And so it's been over 2 years. I stopped drinking alcohol, and that was a really big thing for me, where I realized, well, if I could stop that, this thing I've been doing my entire adult life, but I was doing it as a teen too, really my whole life, and didn't think I would stop that. It wasn't really working for me, but it became habitual, and I stopped, and then it was kind of like, well, if I could stop that, what else can I do? And I joke around with my wife a lot where I say, yeah, I could at a wedding or something have a glass of wine or whatever, but I almost feel like if I started drinking, like even a sip at this point, it would be like Samson cutting his hair. I would just like lose my power. It's been a big driver for me. So that was June 16th of 2022 when I had my last sip of alcohol, which, funny enough, yesterday I heard Billy Strings on Mark Maron, and that was his date. The last time he drank, June 16th.
No way.
It was like 7 years ago, though. And, it was about that time where I started journaling every day, and I started to, I cut out social media, and I stopped watching television. I really stopped kind of wasting my time, and it felt like, we're both fans of Tim Ferriss, and if you read Tools of Titans, it's like most of the people that are these, amazing coaches and business people and athletes, most of them get up really early. So I started to kind of push that, how early can I get up? It was 6:45, then it was 6:30, then, I kept going earlier and earlier and earlier. Now my alarm is set for 5:30, but this morning I woke up at 5:15 and I was like, let's go. I'm ready to go, and so, and along the way, there's just so much information out there that we didn't have before, about the benefits of sleep, for example. And how do you get, if your sleep is bad, like, why is that? You know, and alcohol is definitely one of those things that messes with your sleep, but so does blue light, so does looking at your phone before you go to sleep, or, you know, doing something frenetic. So, you know, so I started to track my sleep, and I bought an Oura ring, and I was looking at it. I'm like, why was I waking up? And oh, right, well, I drank caffeine at, you know, 4. Well, I'm going to stop it at 3. Well, you know, that's not early enough. Let's stop it even earlier. So I stopped drinking caffeine as of 1 o'clock. Then, you know, and it may sound extreme, but then 8 o'clock, my phone is off, and I'm putting blue light glasses on. I'm dimming lights, and, you know, with my kids, and putting my little guy down by 9, and then I'm journaling right after that, and getting ready for bed, and then reading. And I'm hope to be sleeping by 10, you know, every night, and then do it all over again. Get up at 5:30.
Easier said than done for most of us, at least.
Yeah.
I want to drill down into the mindset part of it all, and not only discipline, but more so like creating the life you want, and not just, you know, being complacent to the life you have.
Yeah.
And ultimately, like, what you've learned is most important when about what kind of mindset you have to have and the effect your mindset has.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I am someone who fell prey to having lots of limiting beliefs about myself, you know, and so I just started to challenge those limiting beliefs one by one. And it's almost like anything else. Like, you know, it's funny, like my kids will say, like, oh, I'm not good at this thing. It's like, well, how'd you determine that you're not good at it? You tried it once, and you couldn't do it as well as the kid that's been doing it for 5 years, so now you're not good at it. You know, it's like, no, it takes work. Everything takes work, and it takes effort and focus, um and but I really believe, you know, you could be good at anything. You know, I think finance is a great example of something like where I was like, well, you know, I'm in the music industry. I don't really need that. There are other people who can do that. But you know, one of my side hustles is I started to invest in and raise capital for real estate deals back in 2012. And even then I was like, well, you know, the operators, they kind of have it, and I'm just, you know, I know some high net worth folks, and I'm going to talk to them about this deal that I'm doing, that I have skin in the game about, to try to get them involved. But I wasn't putting in, I just had this limiting belief, like, well, I don't really understand finance, and I don't need to, you know. And then, so that was one of those things that during the pandemic, where I started to take that a lot more seriously, and really, really try to understand what it is, you know, what it is that I'm doing, like, financially. And I started doing my own deals during the pandemic, which was just incredible. You know, that like, if you had asked me a year or two before, I would say, oh, you know, I can't do that. Like, I have to do this with somebody, or, you know, but I was able to do that. You know, I think so CEG, we started in the 90s. We were a management company that quickly realized that was a really hard way to make a living. And it's not like we got out of management. We just began to promote shows on the side. And so in the mid 2000s, we stopped managing talent for the most part. And I was one of the owners of Sullivan Hall, which had been a club called Lions Then that we were booking. And then we started, as a company, we started to really branch out and book shows in a lot of other venues, but also in other cities. And, you know, by 2014, we were just independent promoters going into markets throughout the country. And that's really what I did up until the pandemic. And I didn't really have the vision or the the confidence in myself, again, like limiting beliefs about myself, like I just thought, well, this is what I do, and I'm just going to try to do it at a higher level. But when I started to ask myself the questions, like, you know, kind of, it's what I do now, which is I run things through the filter of, is this connected to the future that I want to have? You know, when I try to determine if I'm going to do something or not. And I started to do that. And I kind of came, I knew what I didn't want to do. You know, I mean, it wasn't that I was going to stop promoting concerts, you know, but I wanted to do other things. And I knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to own a venue. I didn't want to have a festival again, you know, own a festival or manage bands. And so what I came around to was this idea of consulting. And so, you know, I started to help some different companies, and Volume was the first one. It's been almost 2 years where I came on for a specific purpose, which was to sort of help bridge the gap between them and jam bands, because, you know, I've been in that space for so long, but it quickly evolved into something much greater. And it was, you know, people at that company that had these different departments wanted me on their calls. And, you know, having that experience, I started to think to myself, wow, I think I've really been undervaluing my experience, my relationships, and my knowledge. I think I've undervalued that for so long. And you know, what I've been doing ever since really is just leaning into that. And it's led to so many other incredible things that I couldn't have even imagined a few years ago. So yeah, my mindset has shifted quite a bit. But I also think, like, I don't think it's like just that, right? It's my diet and my exercise and my relationships with my wife.
That
and
all
my
stems
kids
from
and
mindset, though, I will say.
Yeah.
Like, diet I feel like is a complete extension of where you're at mentally.
Yeah.
I want to drill down more into what you said about limiting beliefs, like going through this period of avoiding being complacent to your operating system, to those limiting beliefs that just kind of bubble up, and like inspecting those. Like, what have you learned about how we come to hold these limiting beliefs? Because they don't serve us necessarily in a way that helps us get more. Like, why do you think we have limiting beliefs? Why do you think we form them? How do they get there in the first place? Like, what have you come to learn about that part of our mind that creates those?
Yeah, I mean, they're just stories that we tell ourselves. If my kids watch this, they're going to roll their eyes because they hear me talking about this, where, you know, my son will have a friend that's really close, and then they stop hanging out, and I'm like, you know, what happened? Like, I don't know, like he just wasn't nice, or I don't something that I'm like, well, you don't know what he went through. Like, he might have gotten yelled at by his parents this morning, and he's like in a really bad mood, or maybe he's failing a class and that's really impacting how he feels. But like, it's not necessarily, you know, because that's sort of seeped into his consciousness and his being. It doesn't mean that he necessarily feels, you know, negatively towards you, right? It's like Ed Milet talks about this a lot, of the idea of, you know, you're driving down the highway and someone cuts you off and you're like, what an asshole, you know, but that guy rushing down the highway might be rushing to the hospital to get his pregnant wife to the hospital whose water just broke, right? Like, so it's like, you gotta kind of, I think too many of us are in our own heads, and we've sort of decided that, you know, we've made some story up, and that's our reality.
Can you talk to me about how you've developed the skill to have that auto playing story in your head have less power, especially those, like, if we think a thought that's a limiting belief, it's definitely it's totally counterintuitive to just the way our brain works, to challenge that thought and to not listen to it, to not give it that power. How do we have that self-playing story in our head loosen its grip?
So I think a lot of it just boils down to fear. And so you've made the story is really like you're scared, like, what if, right? What if I get rejected? What if I fail? Like, I'm going to look foolish, so I think a lot of that is that. I know I can speak personally that I had a bad experience with public speaking years ago. So then I avoided it for a really long time. And as Arlo's bar mitzvah was approaching, the fall of 2022, because people, it's great, Cam. I'm really happy we've been talking about this for a while. I'm so happy you have me on here. But I think 2 years ago, I would have found a reason not to do it, and so, but I knew I was not going to let fear, it seemed really daunting, but it was just so important to me that I spoke at his bar mitzvah. And so I was asked to speak at this little conference in New Jersey called Concert. It was a lot of people in the Performing Arts Center. So I was talking about alternative programming, and pretty small. I think maybe 75 people were there, but I was like, you know what? And this was his bar mitzvah was October of 2022. This was August of 2022, and I was like, if not now, when? Like, if not now, maybe never. I gotta just do it. And so, I was pretty nervous going up there, and probably nervous for the first 5 minutes or so. But then I was like, oh, this is great. Like I'm actually really enjoying this. And it felt like an incredible accomplishment because I had just avoided it for so long. So I think the bottom line is you got to just kind of, it sounds easier than done, but you're just going to have to get uncomfortable, and you're just going to have to do something that you're afraid to do, and realize that on the other side of that, it was just a story that you built up in your mind. And what's the worst that could happen? Like, the worst thing that could have happened is I would have gotten up in front of 75 of my peers in the industry, and I don't know, maybe seemed more nervous but maybe that could have been in my mind too, like right? So I think I think that's it. I think that's just the answer. I tell my kids, you just have to you're going to have to get uncomfortable. You're going to have to do these things that you might have fear over, but that's the only way that you're going to grow.
I love that you bring up comfort here too, because like the relationship between like comfort and that story in our heads, but it's also, there's an inverse relationship there, because how uncomfortable would you have felt if you didn't do that speaking opportunity, and then it's the day of the bar mitzvah and you don't know if you're even going to do it still? Like,
right,
giving into that story that seeks comfort ultimately doesn't even put you in a position to be more comfortable. And like,
yeah.
what I want to hear you elaborate on is talking about fear, that story in our head, and comfort, and how these things relate, but then also in hindsight, like just how foolish, like not even like perhaps like just totally irrational that story that you might have a limitation in public speaking, like that is purely delusional pretty much.
Yeah.
And it's like what have you learned about that mechanism of how that story, comfort itself, true delusion, all play into each other, and like what that says about the nature of that voice in our head that has limiting beliefs?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that I think I did this, and I'm sure a lot of people did this, where you would say to yourself, well, you know what, when I'm feeling more confident, right, then I will do this thing. But what could give you more confidence than actually doing this thing, right? That you're like, that you're afraid of. And then you go do it and you just put yourself out there. I mean, I just, at Neva, Greg Nacron, who's the COO of Volume, he and I did a fireside chat right before the keynote, talking about Volume for 15 minutes in front of, I don't know, 700-800 people. And yes, I was nervous, but I also, it wasn't just like, you know, like I didn't just like go from hanging out to boom, now I'm on the stage and do it. Like I prepared, I mentally prepared. I, spent some time just before hopping on with you. I spent 5 minutes sitting on my couch back here with my eyes closed, visualizing doing this and breathing and just kind of get, so, I did that probably on a more extreme, level for Neva. But I got up there and I think I did well. I certainly, whether I did well, I mean, I think I did well. And more importantly, I didn't say, no, I'm not going to do that. I got invited to do it. Greg asked me to do it. I was like, well, got to do it. I got to put myself out there. I'm definitely stronger for it mentally, much more prepared to do this type of thing in the future. This is really the first interview I've ever done. I've done a couple podcasts, but not really talking about me necessarily. So this is the first one like this, one-on-one, and I'd love to do more of it.
Yeah, I love this, and it's one of the things I love, like putting a spotlight on in the story that you just shared, is like going up at Neva, right? Let's say you just didn't, let's say you had the opportunity and then you folded.
Yeah.
How uncomfortable would you feel with yourself after that? Like that gives so much timidness to the future. And like if you're a pitcher, you're going to balk instead of throwing right to the hitter. And it's like, yes, something might seem uncomfortable, but giving into that discomfort puts you in this, like it removes any kind of leverage you have internally over, the world, any kind of like,
like have you heard this expression, like how you do anything is how you do everything?
yes.
So
Yes.
And that's why, getting back to the not drinking alcohol anymore, I'm not belaboring over that point to be like, ooh, look at me, I stopped drinking. A lot of people have stopped drinking, but that was such a big anything that poured into my everything.
And how you do anything is how you do everything. And, kind of pulling it full circle. That's why mindset, and like I brought up Joe Dispenza because he's someone who really, really can help like inform someone's mindset. Like literally everything in our lives stems from that. It stems from our disposition of, if we're giving into that kind of, those limiting beliefs, that story in our head, that fear, our disposition towards that is everything. At least that's what I've come to learn from things like Joe Dispenza.
Yeah. And language is really important. How people speak, are they self-deprecating? Are they right? Do they have this language of, excuse me, that sort of exudes negativity? Do they, I think if people are tearing other people down, it's usually to lift themselves up, right?
And so that voice is really like the manifestation of insecurity.
Yeah.
And it's a manifestation of like, I'm scared and insecure, so I'm gonna make up things. I'm gonna tell myself stories about why I can't do something, and I'm going to drag other people down too.
Yeah.
And let's say I'm in that
comes
kind of
down to
spiral.
fear again, Cam.
So let's say like I'm having a bad week and I'm in that spiral.
Yeah.
What, as a friend, like what advice would you give me where it's like the last thing I want to hear is don't give into fear or whatever? Like what advice like truly could you give someone who's listening to this and is like, damn, this is a little bit describing me on some days?
Yeah. Well, I have found, because one of these things on this 3-year journey, one of the things that I realized what I was doing was, I was seeking external validation. You know, the story I always tell is the story of the Rolex watch. I wanted a Rolex watch so bad, and I got one, and I used to wear it all the time. And I never really asked myself why I wanted it, but I think, what I came to as I was doing all this work was I wanted to be the guy seen as like, whoa, he's successful. He has a Rolex watch, and so so I think, yes, I was seeking external validation, and I also was doing what I think a lot of people do, which is compare themselves to others. So you've got someone in your field, Cam, and you're like, wow, like what, why am I not that successful? Or why, look at that car they drive. Like, why am I not driving that? And I think a lot of people do that. And so this is a roundabout way of saying one of the biggest ways I've changed my life is by really focusing on how lucky I am. Like, I have this wife that I adore, like our relationship keeps getting better. Like, I had a chance at a do-over with my kids because I was, prior to the pandemic, going after everything, saying no to nothing. I would always say family first, but really, if I look back at that period, it was definitely work first. And that's not to say I'm not career oriented now, but you know what? I took my little guy, AB, to camp this morning, and I'm going to be picking him up. And, I work from home, and that's pretty remarkable because I used to work in an office in the city when we lived in the city. And so, I'd see them a little bit in the morning, and I would see them a little bit in the evening when I came home, because a lot of times I was going to one of my shows, or, manager was in town, I'd go out to dinner with them, or, something. And now it's like, I can truly say I have two priorities, which are career and family, and everything else is kind of fallen by the wayside.
I think the question that would be best to take us home here. What's something that you believe now about life that you didn't believe when you were younger?
I just think, relationships and connection are everything. And so I would say that I guided a lot of my career in a way like I thought negotiation meant if I win and you lose, like that was a great negotiation for me.
But that's not the case.
It's definitely not the case. And I just love, I really, here's another like on the topic. As a promoter, I used to just sort of go after, the hot band, right? With the agent at William Morris or CAA, and like that everybody else is going after. And it's really only more recently where I realized that, sure, if I connect with one of those agents and we have a meaningful connection, and he sees the value in what I bring, like, great, let's do it. But what I've done, and I think it's been a remarkable transition, really, is I've just leaned into those relationships where I know that person on the other side respects me and appreciates my value in the ecosphere, and where I appreciate them and I respect them. And they might not have the sexiest rosters, but it really doesn't matter. It's not about that. It's about like, what can we do together, and like truly together, and feel this connection as we're doing it. and that's where a lot of my things have gone in a career. And I would say my connection with my wife and my kids are just so incredibly important. And I have, connections to friends. I love that. And I think that's really important, is the connection to other people and the relationship, and respecting the relationship. So that's my long-winded way of answering your question.
Man, Howie, I'm so
Thank you.
glad our paths have crossed. Huge shout out to Dave Weissman for making that happen. And huge shout out to you, Howie, for an absolutely awesome episode here.
Thank you so much, Cam. It's a lot of fun.
My pleasure. Everyone out there listening, we got links in the description to keep up with Howie on LinkedIn, keep up with CEG on socials, see what shows we got coming on. And yeah, this is hopefully part one of many appearances of Howie on the pod. And take care,
I
y'all.
would love to do it again.